Did you hear about the new transfer student? Zixtal chittered excitedly, their crystalline antennae vibrating with barely contained gossip energy. They're sending us a human! Vrakith rolled all four of their eyes simultaneously, a gesture they'd spent cycles perfecting just for moments like this. Oh please, not another fragile Deathworlder story. They'll probably break the moment they sneeze in our gravity. The two Arcturian students were lounging in what passed for their academy's cafeteria. A zero-G chamber filled with floating nutrition spheres and the occasional wayward study pad. The Galactic Federation Academy of Medical Sciences prided itself on being the most diverse institution in the known universe, but even they had never admitted a human before. No, you don't understand! Zixtal's outer carapace was practically glowing with excitement. This one's different. They're coming here on a combat medic exchange program. A what now? Vrakith's lower set of eyes narrowed while the upper pair widened in surprise, another carefully practiced expression. You know, one of those crazy humans who runs into battle to patch up their wounded? They're sending their top graduate to study comparative xenophysiology with us. That's actually kind of impressive, Vrakith admitted reluctantly. But still, they're made of meat. How tough can they really be? As if on cue, the cafeteria's main portal irised open with a soft hiss. The creature that stepped through immediately caught everyone's attention, not because they were particularly large or imposing, but because they moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the station's artificial gravity. The human was clad in the standard white medical uniform of the Academy, modified to accommodate their bizarre bilateral symmetry. Their pale skin, still a source of fascination among the more chitinous species, was marked with what appeared to be deliberate pigmentation patterns on their exposed arms. Their head fur, hair, Zixtal mentally corrected, was pulled back into what they'd learned was called a practical ponytail. Hi there! The human waved cheerfully, making their way over to the Arcturian pair. I'm Sarah Chen, the new exchange student. Mind if I join you? Before either alien could respond, the station's emergency klaxons began blaring. Red warning lights strobed across the cafeteria as the AI's voice echoed through the chamber. Attention all students and faculty. Containment breach in Xenobiology Lab 7. Multiple category, 3 specimens loose. This is not a drill. Please proceed to your designated safety zones. Vrakith's carapace went pale. Lab 7? That's where they keep the Regellian Razorhounds, Sarah finished, already moving toward the exit. Where's the nearest medical bay? 2 levels down, but you can't possibly be thinking of... Zixtal's protest was cut short as Sarah pulled what looked like a compact medkit from her belt. Those things can tear through durasteel, Vrakith warned. Your species' dermal layer wouldn't last 5 seconds. Sarah just grinned, an expression that somehow managed to be both reassuring and slightly unnerving. Good thing I don't plan on letting them get that close then. You two get to safety. I've got patients to treat. The next few hours would fundamentally change how every student at the academy viewed humans. Sarah moved through the chaos like she'd been born for it. The Razorhounds, vicious predators that looked like someone had crossbred a velociraptor with a cheese grater, had already injured several students and faculty members. But wherever the human went, the casualties started dropping. She improvised tourniquets from medical tape and broken equipment. She synthesized species-specific analgesics on the fly. She even managed to rig an exoskeleton from spare parts to support a Jovian whose gravity manipulation organ had been damaged. But it was what happened in Lab 4 that really drove the point home. Sarah had just finished stabilizing a Venusian professor when one of the larger Razorhounds crashed through the wall. The creature's crystalline claws glinted in the emergency lighting as it lunged for a group of terrified first-year students. Without hesitation, Sarah threw herself between the predator and its intended prey. The Razorhound's claws raked across her left arm, drawing bright red human blood, a sight that made several students emit distress pheromones. But Sarah didn't go down. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she grabbed a nearby fire suppression canister with her good arm and discharged it directly into the creature's sensory clusters. As the Razorhound reeled back, temporarily blinded, Sarah shouted instructions to the students. Get them to evacuation point C. I'll hold it here. But you're damaged, one of the students protested. Your structural integrity is compromised. Sarah actually laughed, a sound that seemed completely inappropriate for the situation. It's just a flesh wound. Now move! What followed was a display that would be talked about in the academy for cycles to come. Sarah, despite her injury, managed to keep the Razorhound contained using nothing but improvised tools, and what she later described as basic field medicine principles combined with some creative repurposing of cleaning supplies. When the station's security forces finally arrived, They found Sarah sitting calmly beside an unconscious razor hound, applying a self-sealing bandage to her arm, while simultaneously monitoring the vital signs of 2 injured maintenance workers she'd pulled to safety. "Sorry about the mess," she said, gesturing to the chaos around her with her bandaged arm. "But everyone's stable, and I've cataloged all the treatments I had to improvise. Figure it'll make a pretty interesting case study for xeno-emergency medicine." Later, in the Academy's medical bay, Zixtal and Vrakith visited their new classmate as she received proper treatment for her injuries. "I don't understand," Vrakith admitted. "Our preliminary studies indicated that humans were Class 2 endurance beings at best, but you kept functioning at peak efficiency even after sustaining significant damage." Sarah shrugged, then winced slightly as the motion pulled at her freshly sealed wounds. "Humans are weird like that. We evolved as persistence predators. We're not the strongest or the fastest, but we're really good at not stopping when we need to keep going." "But weren't you afraid?" Zixtal asked, antennae twitching with curiosity. "Terrified," Sarah admitted cheerfully. "But that's kind of the point. Humans don't succeed because we're not scared. We succeed because we keep going anyway. Fear's just data. It tells us we're in danger, but it doesn't get to decide what we do about it." "That's simultaneously inspiring and disturbing," Vrakith noted. "Welcome to human medicine," Sarah grinned. "Now who wants to help me write up the incident report? I've got some fascinating observations about cross-species emergency response protocols, and I think we might be able to get a paper out of this." As their new classmate launched into an enthusiastic discussion of improvised medical techniques, Zixtal and Vrakith shared a look. They'd come into this rotation expecting to babysit a fragile Deathworlder. Instead, they'd gained a colleague who was rewriting their understanding of resilience, both physical and psychological. The Academy's xenobiology textbooks would need significant revision. As it turned out, humans weren't fragile at all. They were simply built to break differently, and more importantly, built to keep going long after most species would have given up. In the cycles that followed, pulling a Chen became Academy slang for continuing to function despite seemingly impossible odds. Sarah herself found this hilarious, especially when she learned that the phrase had made its way into official medical documentation. "Patient exhibited Chen-like persistence in maintaining consciousness" became a legitimate diagnostic notation, much to the confusion of external medical reviewers. The Razorhound incident would later be included in the Academy's official curriculum as a case study in xeno-emergency medicine, cross-species crisis response, and the importance of never underestimating a species just because they appeared to be made of easily damaged organic materials. As for Sarah, she graduated with honors and went on to revolutionize several fields of emergency medicine. Her thesis on adaptive cross-species crisis response, lessons learned from terrestrial emergency medicine, became required reading for medical students across the galaxy. But perhaps her most lasting contribution was the simple note she added to the Academy's species guidebook entry on humans. Warning: damage metrics may not accurately predict functional capabilities. Human medical personnel in particular have been known to continue operating at near-peak efficiency despite injuries that would incapacitate most species. This is not, as previously theorized, due to superior physiological durability, but rather to a psychological characteristic that one human described as spite-powered stubbornness. Further research is needed, but preliminary studies suggest that attempting to convince an injured human medical professional to cease emergency operations is largely futile, and may result in what humans refer to as creative language, and that look. The entry was accompanied by an image of Sarah, taken during the Razorhound incident, giving what would become known throughout the galaxy as the universal human medical professional expression of, "I'm fine, this is fine. Everything is fine, and I will fight you if you try to stop me from helping people." It was this image that Zixtal and Vrakith would point to years later when teaching their own medical students about the importance of understanding that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most resilient species aren't the ones with the toughest exterior, but rather the ones who simply refuse to stop when others need their help. And somewhere out on the frontier of known space, Sarah Chen continued doing what she did best, proving that humans were anything but fragile, one medical emergency at a time. "Student Chen, are you unconscious?" Professor Kovacs's bioluminescent patches flickered with concern as they observed the humans slumped over their study terminal in the Academy's library. Sarah Chen, now infamous throughout the Galactic Federation Academy of Medical Sciences for the Razorhound incident, didn't respond. Her head remained firmly planted on her crossed arms, soft, rhythmic breathing the only sign she hadn't spontaneously expired. Emergency medical protocol initiated, the library's AI announced, causing several nearby students to jump. Human vital signs indicate, override medical protocol alpha, a familiar voice chittered. Zixtal hurried over, their crystalline antennae twitching with what had become recognizable as fond exasperation. She's just sleeping. Sleeping? Professor Kovacs's outer membrane rippled with confusion. During active study hours, is this some sort of protest? Vrakith, who had followed their friend over, performed their now legendary four-eye roll. No, it's a basic human biological function. They do this regularly. Fascinating. The professor's scientific curiosity immediately overwhelmed their concern. And they just cease consciousness? Voluntarily? In the middle of the day cycle? According to Sarah, humans require periodic unconsciousness to maintain optimal brain function. Zixtal explained, having become something of an expert on human biology since befriending Sarah. They call it a power nap, though I'm still not convinced they're not part machine, given that terminology. The small crowd gathering around the sleeping human was interrupted by the arrival of Dean Xylophone. Not their real name, but the one Sarah had given them after spending 10 minutes trying to pronounce the correct series of crystalline chimes. What seems to be the problem here? The Dean asked, their crystalline form refracting the library's lights in patterns that indicated mild concern. Student Chen appears to be engaging in voluntary periodic unconsciousness, Professor Kovacs reported excitedly. Right in the middle of studying for tomorrow's xenocardiology exam. The Dean's crystal facets shifted to a pattern indicating deep thought. Ah yes, the human sleep cycle. We received quite extensive documentation about this when accepting student Chen into our program. Though I must admit, we rather assumed it was an exaggeration. Surely no species could survive regularly becoming unconscious for hours at a time. As if to answer, Sarah let out a soft snore. The really fascinating part, Vrakith added, warming to the subject, is that they can apparently accumulate sleep debt if they don't get enough regular unconsciousness time. And then they have to make up for it later. Like some sort of consciousness accountancy? The Dean mused. Remarkable. But surely this must put them at a severe disadvantage in emergency situations. Zixtal's antennae wiggled in what had become their equivalent of a human laugh. Actually, according to Sarah, humans in emergency medicine have evolved the ability to function on something called coffee and spite for extended periods. Though she says this isn't recommended and can lead to something called crashing, which is apparently not as catastrophic as it sounds. The impromptu seminar on human sleep patterns was interrupted by Sarah suddenly sitting up, blinking, and looking around at the gathered crowd with mild confusion. Did I miss something? She asked, stifling a yawn. Student Chen! Professor Kovacs's bioluminescence was practically strobing with excitement. You must tell us more about this fascinating biological shutdown process. How do you maintain safety protocols while unconscious? What emergency override systems do you have in place? How do you prevent memory corruption during the reboot sequence? Sarah blinked again, her sleep-addled brain taking a moment to process the rapid-fire questions. Well, usually I just set an alarm on my phone. Remarkable! The professor began furiously taking notes on their datapad. A predetermined consciousness restoration signal. The implications for medical practice are staggering. What? Sarah looked to her friends for explanation. You've accidentally started another xenomedicine revolution, Zixtal explained cheerfully. Remember last week when you introduced them to the concept of preventative medicine, and the entire medical faculty had to take a day off to revise their fundamental treatment philosophies? Oh no, Sarah groaned, dropping her head back to the desk. Not again, but it was too late. Within hours, the concept of scheduled consciousness cessation was being discussed in every corner of the academy. Research proposals were being drafted. Grant applications were being filed. Several species were already attempting to replicate the process, with varying degrees of success and a few minor explosions. By the end of the week, the Academy had established its first dedicated Human Biological Function Research Center, with Sarah as the reluctant primary test subject. Her protests that napping was really not that complicated fell on deaf ears, or whatever sensory organs the various species used to detect sound waves. The resulting paper, Voluntary Periodic Consciousness Cessation, Revolutionary Implications for Galactic Medicine, would go on to win several prestigious awards and completely revolutionize how the medical community approached species-specific rest cycles. Sarah's contribution to the paper consisted entirely of a series of increasingly exasperated footnotes, explaining that humans had not, in fact, mastered some revolutionary form of consciousness control. They just got cranky without regular naps. These footnotes were largely ignored by the scientific community, who were too busy being amazed by humanity's extraordinary biological shutdown capabilities to listen to her protests that it was literally just sleeping. Please stop poking me with scanners while I'm trying to nap. The whole incident led to the addition of another warning in the Academy's species guidebook entry on humans. Note: humans require regular periods of consciousness cessation, sleep, to maintain optimal function. Do not attempt to prevent this process. Do not attempt to replicate this process without proper safety protocols in place. Do not, under any circumstances, disturb a sleeping human medical professional unless there is an actual emergency. Definition of actual emergency may vary. Refer to Appendix C. Things that are not actually emergencies, even if they seem like they should be. A subnote was later added. The aforementioned coffee substance is not, as previously theorized, a sophisticated consciousness control drug, but rather a simple stimulant beverage. However, attempting to separate a human medical professional from their coffee supply is classified as a Category 1 risk scenario. Proceed with extreme caution. In the years that followed, Sarah's accidental nap would be credited with advancing galactic understanding of species-specific rest requirements by several centuries. The resulting research led to major improvements in medical care across the galaxy, as healthcare providers began to actually consider that different species might have different biological needs. Sarah herself would only learn about this years later, when she discovered that her face, specifically her confused expression upon waking up to find half the Academy studying her nap, had become the standard medical textbook illustration for revolutionary medical breakthrough achieved through entirely accidental means. She decided to take a nap, rather than deal with that particular revelation. When asked for comment, she was quoted as saying, "Look, I just wanted to rest my eyes for 5 minutes before the exam. I didn't mean to revolutionize galactic medicine. Again, can everyone please stop studying my sleeping patterns now?" The answer, of course, was no. The galaxy had discovered the concept of power naps, and there was no going back. In the end, Sarah had to admit that there were worse ways to revolutionize medicine than by taking a well-deserved nap. Even if it did mean that every time she dozed off in public, someone inevitably started taking notes about human consciousness control techniques. At least it made for a good story at medical conferences, assuming she could stay awake long enough to tell it. By the 7 crystalline moons, what is that? Verkith's 4 eyes widened in horror as they watched Sarah Chen pull a mysterious black container from her bag. The human medical student was starting her first night shift rotation in the Academy's emergency care center, and her alien classmates had noticed she seemed different. More focused. Almost predatory. This? Sarah grinned, her teeth gleaming in the medical bay's soft bioluminescent lighting. This is what we humans call triple shot espresso with 2 energy shots and a prayer, also known as night shift fuel. The liquid inside the container was darker than the void between stars and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As Sarah unscrewed the cap, several nearby medical sensors began beeping in alarm. "Warning," the medical bay's AI announced. "Unknown chemical compound detected. Potential biohazard proto." "Override medical protocol beta," Sarah sighed, taking a long drink from the container. "It's just coffee. Really, really strong coffee." Zixtal's antenna curled in distress. "But our chemical analysis indicates that substance contains enough stimulants to send a Jovian gas giant whale into cardiac arrest." "Yep." Sarah's grin somehow grew wider. Her pupils were already beginning to dilate. "That's kind of the point. How else am I supposed to stay awake for a 36-hour shift?" 36 hours? Professor Kovacs, who had been passing by with a stack of patient charts, stopped so abruptly their bioluminescent patches flickered in distress. Humans can maintain consciousness for 36 consecutive temporal units? With enough caffeine, humans can do pretty much anything, Sarah explained, taking another sip. It's basically spite in liquid form. The professor's patches began strobing in what Sarah had learned to recognize as their taking furious mental notes pattern. Fascinating. And this chemical compound allows you to override your species' natural unconsciousness cycles without adverse effects? Oh no, there are definitely adverse effects. Sarah laughed, a sound that made several nearby students back away slowly. But that's what the second backup coffee in my locker is for. And the emergency energy drinks. And the chocolate-covered espresso beans. And the... Student Chen. Dean Xylophone's crystalline form shimmered into view, their facets arranged in what Sarah had dubbed their concerned administrator pattern. Are you telling me you intend to chemically alter your consciousness for an extended period while treating patients? Don't worry, Sarah assured them, patting her medkit. I brought enough for the whole shift. The Dean's crystals rearranged themselves into their deeply troubled configuration. That was not the concern. They were interrupted by the emergency care center's incoming patient alert. A mining accident in the asteroid belt had resulted in multiple casualties, and they were about to get very busy. What followed would go down in Academy history as the Night of the Caffeinated Human. Sarah moved through the emergency department like a well-oiled machine, her movements precise despite operating on what she later described as enough caffeine to kill a small horse. She treated patients, coordinated care teams, and even found time to teach several interns about proper emergency response protocols. The alien medical staff watched in fascination and horror as she periodically consumed more of her night shift fuel, each dose seemingly increasing her efficiency while making her explanations progressively more colorful. Okay, so think of a Martian rockworm's circulatory system like a really complicated subway system, she told a group of wide-eyed students around hour 20, her words coming out at approximately twice their normal speed. But instead of trains, you've got acidic blood, and instead of passengers, you've got oxygen molecules doing parkour. By hour 30, she had developed an entirely new surgical technique for treating crystalline life forms, written half a research paper on comparative emergency medicine protocols, and taught the medical bay's AI to understand human medical slang. Code Brown was now officially recognized in the Academy's emergency protocol database. Is this normal? Zixtal asked Vrakith as they watched Sarah simultaneously suture a patient's wound while explaining 3 different treatment protocols to a group of interns. For humans? Based on what I've observed, possibly? Vrakith's upper eyes tracked Sarah's movements while their lower eyes monitored the steadily growing collection of empty coffee containers on her workstation. Though I'm fairly certain she's vibrating at a frequency that's technically illegal in 3-star systems. Around hour 35, Sarah made what she would later describe as a slight miscalculation in her caffeine intake timing. The resulting crash was spectacular enough to warrant its own research paper. I can still work, she insisted as her friends finally convinced her to lie down in one of the recovery pods. Just need one more coffee. Student Chen, the Dean's crystals arranged themselves into their sternest pattern. You have performed admirably, but I must insist you engage in your species' required consciousness cessation period before you accidentally discover another revolutionary medical procedure. But, no buts, Zixtal chittered firmly. The last time you got this tired, you started explaining human medical concepts using interpretive dance. We're still trying to convince the xenobiology department that humans don't actually communicate through ritualistic movement patterns. Sarah's protests were cut short by a massive yawn. Fine, but wake me if anything interesting happens. She was asleep before she finished the sentence. In the aftermath of what became known as the caffeinated incident, the Academy Species Guidebook entry on humans received several important updates. Warning: human medical professionals have been observed to utilize powerful chemical stimulants, coffee and its various derivatives, to maintain extended periods of consciousness. While impressive, this practice can lead to excessive verbal output, increased movement speed, spontaneous problem-solving, revolutionary medical breakthroughs, inappropriate use of metaphors, temporary conviction of invincibility, development of new surgical techniques while humming what they refer to as sick beats. Note: attempting to separate a human medical professional from their stimulant supply during extended work periods is classified as a Category 0 risk scenario. This is not a typo. Category 0 was created specifically for this situation. A further note was added specifically about Sarah. Student Chen is no longer permitted to bring her special blend night shift fuel onto Academy premises without first submitting a complete chemical analysis and signing no less than 7 liability waivers. This policy was implemented after the incident. We don't talk about involving 3 surgeries, a spontaneous lecture on human emergency medicine, and what she referred to as a sick dance break. The incident did have some positive outcomes. The Academy established new guidelines for species-specific work shift durations, and chemical stimulant protocols became a required course for all medical students. Sarah's contribution to these developments was minimal, as she spent most of the following week catching up on sleep. However, her night shift fuel recipe was classified as a controlled substance in 14 star systems and became the subject of no less than 23 research papers. When she finally woke up, Her only comment was, "Did anyone save my coffee?" The answer was yes. It was being stored in a maximum security containment unit in the xenobiology lab, right next to the Razorhounds. The Razorhounds, according to reports, seem nervous about their new neighbor. Is it just me, or is Sarah acting strange? Zixtal's antennae twitched nervously as they watched their human friend aggressively organize medical supplies. It was midway through another busy shift at the Galactic Federation Academy of Medical Sciences, and something was definitely off about their normally cheerful human colleague. Sarah Chen, hero of the Razorhound incident and infamous consumer of night shift fuel, was currently sorting hypodermics with what could only be described as vindictive precision. "Define strange," Vrakith replied, all four eyes tracking Sarah's increasingly aggressive movements. "Human strange or actual strange?" She just told a first-year student that their suture technique made her want to fight the concept of entropy itself. Ah. Vrakith's lower eyes narrowed while their upper pair widened in recognition. When was the last time anyone saw her consume sustenance? Before Zixtal could answer, Sarah whirled around, pointing an accusatory finger at a slightly misaligned stack of bandages. "Who did this? Who thinks this is acceptable medical supply organization? I will find you, and I will teach you about proper inventory management through interpretive screaming." "Oh no!" Zixtal's crystalline structure vibrated with concern. "She's entered what she calls the hangry state, hasn't it?" "The what now?" Professor Kovacs materialized nearby, their bioluminescent patches already shifting into taking notes mode. "It's a human condition," Vrakith explained, having become something of an expert in human behavioral patterns through necessity and survival instinct. A combination of hungry and angry that occurs when they go too long without food. Sarah explained it once, though she was eating a candy bar rather aggressively at the time. "Fascinating." The professor's patches strobed excitedly. "So their emotional state is directly tied to their nutritional intake? But surely a sophisticated species would have evolved past such basic biological imperatives?" "You!" Sarah suddenly appeared beside them, making everyone jump. "Has anyone seen my emergency protein bar? The one I keep in my locker for exactly this kind of situation? The one that someone seems to have moved?" Student Chen. Dean Xylophone's crystalline form shimmered into view, their facets arranged in what had become their standard dealing with human situations pattern. "Perhaps you should take a brief nutrition break." "I don't need a break," Sarah declared, her eye twitching slightly. "I need people to respect the organizational system I spent 3 hours implementing." "Sarah," Zixtal ventured cautiously, "when was the last time you ate something that wasn't coffee?" Sarah opened her mouth to respond, then paused, her face scrunching in concentration. "What day is it?" "That's it," Vrakith announced, all four eyes rolling in synchronized exasperation. "Emergency protocol activated." "We don't have an emergency protocol for—" the dean began. "Yes, we do," Zixtal interrupted, already moving towards their locker. "We created one after the great caffeine crash of last semester. Protocol, feed the human before she reorganizes the entire medical bay again." From their locker, they produced what appeared to be a small survival kit labeled, "In case of hangry human, break glass." You made an emergency food kit for me?" Sarah's anger seemed to waver, briefly replaced by touched confusion before snapping back to irritation. "Wait, is that why all my snacks kept disappearing? Have you been stockpiling my food?" "Student Chen," Professor Kovacs interjected, their patches now strobing in full research mode. "Would you say your current emotional state is more influenced by the lack of nutrition or the discovery of your colleagues' well-meaning but potentially invasive food hoarding behavior?" What? I just... Sarah's brain apparently couldn't decide between being angry about the food theft or grateful for the emergency preparations. The resulting expression was something entirely new to xenobiology. "Quick!" Vrakith hissed, shoving what appeared to be a chocolate bar into Sarah's hands, "before she invents a new medical procedure out of spite." The transformation that followed would later be documented in no less than 12 research papers. As soon as Sarah bit into the chocolate bar, the dangerous gleam in her eyes began to fade. By the second bite, her shoulders had relaxed. By the third, she was looking around at the aggressively reorganized medical supplies with an expression of mild embarrassment. "Oh no," she groaned, mouth still full of chocolate. "I went full hangry in front of everyone, didn't I?" "Remarkable!" Professor Kovacs was practically vibrating with scientific excitement. The immediate behavioral modification upon introduction of sustenance. The clear correlation between nutrition and emotional stability. This must be documented. Please don't document this, Sarah sighed, accepting another snack from the emergency kit. It's just low blood sugar. It happens to humans sometimes. It's really not that interesting. But it was too late. The professor was already drafting a research proposal titled Nutritional Impact on Human Emotional Stability, a case study in hunger-induced aggression management. The incident led to several important changes at the academy. First, emergency food stations were installed throughout the medical bay, each clearly marked with human stabilization supplies, in case of hangry emergency. Second, a new section was added to the xenobiology coursework specifically covering the relationship between human nutritional needs and their emotional stability. And finally, the Academy's species guidebook entry on humans received yet another update. Warning: human medical professionals require regular nutritional intake to maintain optimal emotional stability. Signs of nutritional deficiency may include but are not limited to excessive criticism of organizational systems, aggressive efficiency, spontaneous inventory reorganization, threats to fight abstract concepts, development of increasingly complex filing systems, emotional reactions to inanimate objects, creation of new medical protocols out of spite. Note: if a human medical professional displays these symptoms, immediately implement Protocol HANGRY, Hunger-Activated Negative Gradient Response. Yikes. Do not attempt to reason with them. Do not suggest they calm down. Do not ask them to explain their new organizational system. Simply provide appropriate nutrition and back away slowly. A subnote was later added. Under no circumstances should you attempt to separate a human from their emergency snack supplies. This action has been classified as a Category 1 risk scenario. Yes, -1. We had to extend the scale. Again. Sarah's contribution to these developments was minimal, as she spent most of the following week pretending it had never happened. However, her infamous reorganization system was actually adopted as the medical bay's standard, though no one dared mention this to her. The emergency food kit system spread to other medical facilities across the galaxy, leading to a marked decrease in hunger-related human incidents. Though there was that one time on Space Station 7 when they ran out of chocolate. But that's another story. When asked for comment about the whole situation, Sarah only said, "Look, sometimes humans get hangry. It's not a big deal. But if anyone touches my new supply organization system, they will learn exactly how creative human medical professionals can get with bandage application. No one has dared to test this threat." The end. Note: 3 research papers, 2 medical protocols, and 1 intergalactic snack food distribution network were established as a direct result of this incident. Sarah maintains that everyone is overreacting, but she keeps her emergency chocolate supply fully stocked, just in case.